Hello everyone, my name is Joe Theodore and welcome back to the channel. So today I want to discuss something that may be hard for some of us to hear, but this is a fact and topic in astrology that I have observed for many years. But I do want to offer not a trigger warning, but if any of you guys are sensitive, like really sensitive to anything regarding trauma, childhood trauma, family trauma, then maybe this video isn't for you. But for some of you who are interested in this and this topic that I feel is very important for even healing, or a lot of healing, because astrology can really point us in the direction of understanding why things are the way they are, why things have happened in our life. In my life experience, I really have healed from some things that were really important for me to understand looking back. And when I realized the transits were telling me a story about those events, it didn't necessarily heal me or comfort me, so to speak, but it made me realize that there is something greater here going on for our evolution, for our spiritual growth, and just life, in general. So when it comes to astrology, mainly astrology, because, tarot can show us, in a reading, some trauma that we could have been through or going through. But astrology is really the navigational tool, a map of the past, the present, and the future. And it's not all sunshine and roses, guys. And I know that there's a lot of channels and a lot of astrologers out there that are all, love and light 24/7. And I am a very loving person. I come from a place of honesty and integrity. And I do my best to really teach people in the world, like students in the world, clients. Hopefully you guys know that there's so much more to astrology than just sun sign astrology and, Venus is just love. No, there's so much more. There's so many layers to the multidimensional mystery and human story that I believe needs to be discussed. And I feel the more that people are interested in that kind of stuff in astrology, the more depth and the more understanding and healing and transformation can take place in one's life. So before I begin, I would just like to say this video is sponsored by the like button, the comment section, and the subscribe button. So if you enjoy anything that I've done thus far in the channel, if you enjoy this video, please consider doing all of those. It'll really help the channel's growth. Okay, so I have a few notes here on my phone because childhood trauma and family trauma, and I'm going to keep it narrowly focused today because there's so many things in astrology that could indicate childhood trauma, trauma generally speaking, domestic violence, family trauma, that may have nothing to do with you, but just you living in an environment growing up or something that had a lot of trauma, and it just sort of trickles down to all of us. Because to be honest, I think all humans have trauma. I think the collective trauma of the world, of conditioning and society and evil, light versus dark, this is a human story and spiritual battle that's been going on probably since the dawn of time. But in this video, I'm going to keep it focused to a few things that I feel I'm very confident in talking about. But there are planets and certain transits and certain houses that, that I may not speak about today. And in the future, I might do more of a longer talk or maybe a class, an hour-long class. So I want to keep this focused, guys. So first, I want to say that Scorpio risings, in my experience, are always prone to some kind of early trauma in life. I think that's what makes a Scorpio rising become a Scorpio rising. You know what I mean? Like the way that they're perceived in the world, kind of like maybe a mysterious, kind of hardened demeanor to a certain extent. And I think it's because Scorpio risings come into this world innately more intuitive. I think they come into this world a little bit more, prepared for seeing through bullshit, because earlier in life, something has occurred that has made them, look at this world from a bird's eye view, maybe look at their life and their surroundings growing up in a very serious way. Now, of course, the Scorpio rising has, and I want to say the third house and the fourth house are probably some of the biggest indicators for childhood trauma and family trauma. Because as we go through the zodiac, first house through 12, when we get to the third and when we get to the fourth, we start dealing with siblings, local environments, early life still. And then the fourth house is about family, your roots, your home. And yes, again, guys, we can find trauma in almost every house, but there are major houses that trauma really exists. Like, trauma won't necessarily be found in the ninth. It'll be found in the third. It'll be found in the fourth. It'll be found in the seventh, because it has to do with relationships and love. And, that could be like observing your parents' love. Even the 10th house can show trauma, because that represents the father, aside from public career and, your persona in life and how the world can look at you. It also represents the father in traditional astrology. And then the fourth house would represent your mother. But again, that's going a little deep into ancient philosophy with astrology. But Scorpio risings are classic, in my opinion, for struggle. And then, of course, aspects to that make all the difference. Squares and oppositions will make things much more challenging. Pluto in the first house, I feel anyone who has Pluto in the first house can be prone to childhood trauma or even traumatic childhood birth, So your mother could have had a hard time with you. You could have both been at risk for death. And believe it or not, that's kind of stuff can be embedded in our DNA. And, it kind of can carry us, carry itself with us as we move forward in life. And it's really interesting how the psychology of a human can, it can already like set us up for more trauma in our life based upon an actual traumatic birth, even though we have no recollection of that, of course. So that's something else to consider. Also, I'll be talking about Mars in a bit, but Mars, anything that has to do with Mars in the first house, Scorpio risings are ruled by Mars. So if you have a Pluto-Scorpio combination or any aspects from Pluto to Mars in the first house, that can indicate trauma. But again, dealing with signs in the first house like a Scorpio is just a good example for me to just say in this initial conversation of talking about trauma. Because we can also put Cancer risings there and have some really rough planets and aspects to Cancer rising that really puts us in a more submissive place, where trauma can easily be penetrated because maybe a Cancer rising is very sensitive and vulnerable. And if there's anything coming at that in an aggressive way, that can just show, the environment potentially of the early life of an individual having trauma or being trauma prone. And if you want to look back at your life, you can maybe say, oh my God, that's why, this was the destiny I was fated with, Now, to move on from the Scorpio risings and any harsh aspects to the first house, the third and fourth house is also very important. Third house has to do with siblings, your upbringing, your immediate surroundings, parts of your family structure, but more of just like your life, extended family, even a little bit, I would say, even though some astrologers wouldn't agree with me with that. But the third house is very connected to the fourth because it comes right after, and we transition into the fourth talking about the family, the home life. The bottom of the chart, which represents your roots. So on the surface level, again, initially talking about this topic, the fourth house is very significant for any astrologer to look at when it comes to childhood trauma. That being said, there are certain zodiac signs I believe are immediate indications for exploring that with a client or with yourself. I would say Pisces, Pisces, Aries, and Scorpio. So Scorpio again, because Scorpio is a very heavy, serious, intense, darker sign in its most negative way, in its most challenging aspects. So I say Pisces, and again, I don't want to talk the ruler of Pisces is Neptune, but also in traditional astrology, it's Jupiter, which is more promising, to have Jupiter as the ruler for that. But Neptune can also be an extremely potent indicator of trauma because of the delusion and the illusion of something and the mental mind games that can be played with a Neptune influence, and especially if Neptune's influenced by Mercury in any darker way. Because again, all planets have a dark side, guys. But I'm not going to be talking about Neptune necessarily, but just keep in mind that when I discuss Pisces, I'm also incorporating a Neptunian energy there. So Pisces in the third, Pisces in the fourth can indicate that there were secrets involved in your immediate environment, secrets and a lot of trickery and mind games and illusion of something, within the childhood dynamic, within the structure of a child's life, or in your life generally speaking, because maybe you could be going through trauma as an adult as well. So these things apply, throughout your life, of course. So this video isn't strictly about childhood trauma. It's about just where trauma comes from. Most of our trauma comes from the home life. It comes from our environments where we are settled, or want to be settled. And then it comes from relationships. The most personal relationships, which to me is the third house, the fourth house, and the seventh house. So Pisces, a big indicator. And of course, if we have Mars and Pluto at all. So Mars and Pluto, to me, are some of the most clear indications of trauma, domestic violence, any sort of very difficult energies to be having been placed upon oneself. And then I will bring in Aries and Scorpio here, because Aries is ruled by Mars. Scorpio in a traditional astrologer, the traditional astrologer methods, is ruled by Mars. And Mars can bring about anger and violence and, mind manipulation. So anything that has to do with violence, an emotional sense, a spiritual sense, and a physical sense, Mars will be present, in its most negative manifestations. Pluto is right there. Pluto is intense. It is one of the most powerful planets and transits in the world of astrology, but in the world as well. You get what I mean. Because Pluto is so transformative, and even some of the most horrible things in life will transform us, whether we get transformed temporarily for the worse or whether we get transformed for the better. But all transformation usually requires some darkness. And when we're dealing with Scorpio, which is ruled by Pluto and Mars, we're dealing with both of those things. Aries is ruled by Mars, so right off the bat, we have to be concerned with anger, any sort of conflict and violence. And when you see these in the third and fourth house, and especially if they're aspected in certain ways, I would like to say Mars, Pluto conjunctions are the most powerful, but any sort of squares and oppositions can also be heavy indications of conflict, tension, traumatic events, so on and so forth. So I think when you're dealing with any sort of Mars and Plutonic influences, and you have Pisces, Aries, or Scorpio in the third and fourth house, or in the first house, and then if we want to take it to the seventh, which I wasn't really planning on talking about today, but the seventh house is about one-on-one relationships, partnerships of any kind, spouses. It could still kind of bring in motherly things, it could still bring in dynamics within the family, because the mother can be linked to the seventh house still. So those are extremely important indications to mention here. Now, let me see what I have here. Now, also, I'm concluding this video quite shortly because I don't want to make this that long, and I'm not even sure what minute I'm at right now, but I also want to mention Cancer. Whether you're Cancer rising, or you have Cancer in the third house, Cancer in the fourth house, or even Cancer in the seventh. And the reason why I say that is because if you have any one of those signs, and that is your energy in your birth chart, like in those areas of your life, that's your innate, frequency, where you probably are integrating that kind of energy and, expressing that kind of energy. When you have a Mars and a Pluto involved in that stuff, or those signs in those houses, you're putting some of the most intense planetary influences in one of the most sensitive zodiac signs. And those triggers on opposite ends of the spectrum can be devastating. They could be extremely transformative of one's life, meaning having trauma. Having trauma means that something has transformed you, and maybe you haven't dealt with it, or you haven't, it's still just stored in your data system. So Cancers are very, very susceptible to trauma, and sometimes, in my opinion, even magnets for trauma. It's just the way it is, for all of its archetypes and all of its significations of what Cancer means. There's just forces in this world that want to prey on the weak, prey on the vulnerable, prey on the sensitive. And Cancer is nothing but that. So when we have Mars, Pluto influences affecting the sign of Cancer in those houses, 1st, 3rd, 4th, and 7th, we can really see indications of abuse or any sort of really, really hard things going on in someone's life, or in what they could have been through already. 3rd and 4th houses would indicate more of the childhood stuff. And again, even the 1st house, because when we go through the zodiac, first house through 12, we're literally going through a journey of human evolution, from birth all the way to death, 12th house being death, And I'm actually going to be doing a class that I'll be charging $15 for. I hope that's reasonable. And it's going to be a beautiful class, probably about an hour or so long. How the 12 signs of the zodiac reveal your life's hidden purpose. And I'll probably be launching that within the next week or two. And I'll show you where you can purchase that and you can keep the video forever. And it'll explain more of what I mean by, how the 1st house can represent birth, early childhood. It's not all about just like yourself in the world, but when you're born is the first moment you are considered a self from other humans and from the collective, So that's why the 1st house really can represent childhood, and trauma. So I hope all of this makes sense, guys. I hope that this maybe helped some of you. Again, if you want a reading from me, we can dive deep into this stuff. You're safe with me. I can guide you and explain things to you, and we can talk things out. I know in astrology, just knowing some of these things that we can say we're predestined in a way can be comforting, even though it's very hard. But the good thing about astrology is creating awareness and creating some kind of understanding that some of these things happen for a reason, as hard as that is to say. Because nobody deserves violence, trauma, conflict, stuff like that. And then to close, I do want to say just one little thing about Neptune. Neptune, the only reason why I bring that up is because Neptune can really play mind games with us. Even though Mercury, Neptune influences, Mercury, Neptune influences in some of those houses, Pisces, Aries, Scorpio, in those, the 1st, 3rd, 4th, and 7th. That can really signify, just being in a illusory world where you're not knowing what's going on. Like, emotional trauma can really come from Neptunian influences that are really afflicted by Mars or Pluto. And yes, throw Mercury in the mix and we're dealing with mental mind manipulation and psychological, fuckery and trauma there. So those are also very heavy indications, guys. And that's just something else I wanted to note. But when I wanted to make this video today, it was more about talking about Mars, honestly, and Pluto in those houses, in those zodiac signs, because those are very explosive, and it could really, again, just bring us some clarity and understanding around why some of us have gone through some of the things we've gone through. And for the sake of astrological studies, astrological exploration, diving deeper into what true astrology is, and I know no astrologer talks about some of these things, this is really important, guys. It really is. Talking about deeper stuff sometimes is very important, and if you are following me on this journey, on this channel, we will dive deep. We will dive deep, because I also want to transform and help you develop and heal, not just predict things for you or forecast things for you. So I hope that's acceptable, and I hope that this is something you can take kindly to here. So that being said, that's all I have for you all today. I do hope you took something away from this. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you stay to the end. And sending you so much love, and I will see you in the next video.